Okay, so today we're going to be discussing the second component of emotional intelligence, which is self-regulation. And this is another component that I think we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. A lot of work to do. Self-regulation, that is this is going to be a fun conversation.
It's going to be good. It almost seems like self-awareness is kind of like the precursor to self-regulation, actually kind of the precursor to all of the components. And this is like recognizing that my reaction to something is maybe not in proportion to the circumstances. But let's just start, of course, with defining things. What is self-regulation?
Yeah, that's our ability to understand and manage our behaviors and our reactions to feelings and things that are happening around us. I will argue that self-regulation is a tremendous teacher about self-awareness. I think when I started focusing on self-regulation and I need to pause, I learned so much more about myself than just trying to necessarily navigate through self-awareness. We have a lot to learn from ourselves when it comes to self-regulation.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So I definitely think I know that triggers are going to come up in this. And I think that triggers are probably one of the most potent informers for us to look at when we are starting to work with self-regulation. Because I think they show us where the work lies that we need to really be looking at. So if I'm in a situation and I act completely out of proportion to what the circumstance was, that's the opportunity for me to step back and say, ooh, that was a bit much for this particular situation. And it reminds me of this quote that if it's hysterical, it's historical. So if you are having this crazy response to something, there's something in your history that you need to go back and look at that is triggering that level of response.
Yes. Triggers are massive informers about ourselves. Disproportionate anger, dysregulation when it comes to how we manage. So we might not fly off the handle, but maybe we're compulsively shopping. Maybe we're having that extra glass of wine. Maybe we're putting Vegas 20 extra bucks in the slot machine, or all sorts of things that are also part of that self-regulation piece. It's not always anger and the fight. It's also the other behaviors that are happening that can be a little more subtle. We get really good at justifying our behaviors and what we're doing. I deserve it. It's been a long week. And that can be very dangerous. Our brains get very good at justifying bad behavior. That's why self-regulation is so important. And it's a big teacher. Where you want to start here, but we can just start with triggers. Triggers are all right.
Let's start with triggers.
We have three primary needs, and all triggers, whatever they are. Mine is people who cut in line. That will I don't know if I'm standing outside a concert, getting in line to get somewhere. If someone cuts in line, oh my gosh, that is an immediate trigger for me. I don't know. What's yours? Do you know what yours is?
When I think about it, it's not really it's a pet peeve for sure. Does it get me triggered? But when people are in the right lane and they're not turning right, and I'm turning right.
Yes, right. You're what is going on here? Don't we all know the rules to the road?
Right.
And we talk to them, right? Because you're home every once in a while. But the thing is, we all have things, maybe it's socks on the floor, dishes in the sink, things that are going on. Maybe it's people who aren't turning reports in on time at work, or there's, people who don't respond to text messages, or they're not calling you back, right? We all have triggers. Go ahead.
There's a trigger for me. So when you share something with somebody in order to get feedback, or what do you think of this, whatever that might look like, and then it's crickets.
Oh yeah.
Well, I was just vulnerable in sharing with you this thing, and now I'm out here in the ether waiting for a response. Yeah, I get triggered with that. It's I thought that you were somebody that I could trust and that would get back to me on this. There's a reason I chose you to send this to. Yeah, that's a trigger. That's a big trigger.
All right, so there we go. We found it.
Yep.
The right lane was just
that was just the buildup.
But we all have them, right? We all have them. And the thing that the concept that really, when we were in school together, the concept that really hit me was like, triggers are about us. They're not about other people. And I immediately got triggered by that. I was like, no, they're not. Like that person's being a jerk, or that person said something that's not right, or that person. It's very easy that we think that it's like other people's problems that are doing it, but triggers are about us, because there is three underlying needs under all those things that are going on, whatever they are, there's three things. So the need for power and control, right? I feel powerless right now. I don't feel like I have control over this situation. Maybe I've given my power and control away to other people, and like, I need to take it back. So I need to feel like I have control of this situation. So for the need for power and control, that's the first one. The second one is respect and recognition, being seen, being heard, like being recognized. That's the second one. And the third need is care and closeness. That's the need for connection, right? That's the need that I feel connected to you. And what happens is we argue about all the things up here. You didn't return my text message. Don't cut in line. Like, that's rude. People are waiting, or, honking your horn. Like, that's what's happening. And we look at those situations without recognizing the true need going on, saying like, oh no, I'm looking for respect and recognition. That's mine. That's my big thing. It's not with power and control. It's not connection. That's mine. What's yours? If you think about,
I mean, when I think about that particular trigger, it would be respect and recognition. Like, it's disrespectful when I send something to you for your feedback that you don't reply, or you reply when it's too late. Like, at that point, I can't make changes to something because it's due tomorrow, or, whatever. Or just the recognition that it's important to me. This is important to me. And I chose you to be a part of this process, and you didn't even recognize that.
You didn't see me.
Yeah.
I don't feel heard. I don't feel seen. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're all walking around with those needs, and they come from our childhood, like everything does, right? Comes from our childhood. And then now in adulthood, we have experiences those trigger that being seen, being heard. And that's work, right? I had to do the work when those triggers would come up. I remember I would get into arguments with my husband all the time, and they were always about how much I was doing here, and he'd argue how much he's doing, right? We're trying to like tit for tat this whole thing. And then I'm pissed off. And it was really about being seen at home, feeling valued for the value I bring to whatever's, domestic value is, right? And so we would get into these like big arguments. And then when I started to practice this, I was like, oh, this is my need for being seen, being heard. And the thing about triggers, they're about us, they're not about other people. It wouldn't matter how many times my husband told me he valued or whatever, changed his behavior. It wouldn't matter how many people responded immediately to you, or if they're like, thank you for telling me, Kristen, I appreciate you letting me know. Like, it would never be enough. It would never be enough, because I have to find that within. Like, I have to know that I'm valued. I have to respect myself. I have to see myself first. Like, I have to know that what I bring to the domestic labor in the house is of value, and believe that, not just say that, but believe that, and not need someone outside of me to validate that for me. Same with power and control, right? Like, take back the power and control that you have given away, right? And do that. Take back your power and control. Like, you have a voice, you have a means, you have a way. Like, build that confidence again, build that up. But typically in childhood, something happened. Same with connection. I have to find connection within. I have to be connected to who I am. I got to be taking care of myself, building trust with myself, all those things, so that we're not
So asking a question, I would say for a friend, but we know what that means.
The audience sent in a question. Someone sent in,
we just got an AMA. So in the sense that, like, when I think about that particular situation where I've asked somebody for feedback on something I've created, right? So that's like, that's personal to me, right? And there's this no response, or this vastly late response in it. In the meanwhile, I'm sitting in the ether like, oh God, did they hate it, or do they do that? Like, I'm in that vulnerability. And when that's compromised by not responding, or responding so late, to me, that feels like not a safe space.
I'd be interested to know where that came up when you were younger, not being responded to. someone not valuing the value that you're bringing. And then the spiral, maybe the fear, was it terrible? Do they hate me? Like
yeah.
where did that come from a space?
I will have to dig here's the fun part, digging a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
Because I can't think of anything right off the top of my head that like directly correlates to that. But I guess in a sense, and maybe that isn't like not a safe space just because they didn't respond or didn't, but I'm somehow correlating that to being not a safe space.
Your brain is going to find connections any way it can.
Yeah.
Any way it can, right? And most of the times we're wrong, right? We're wrong. Like our brain will tell us what it needs to tell itself to make itself feel like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, it's not even just because you place a lot of value on it doesn't mean you need to place the same, that the other person is, that they have to value it just the same, or that their inaction is any reflection towards you or the work that you're doing or whatever. Like we tend to think other people think just like us, and they don't.
Yeah. Right.
And I love that you brought that up, because it's like a rewiring we have to do in our brain. They absolutely could be a safe space. They could absolutely respond 9 out of 10 times immediately upon the thing and want to be there for you. But like, people were not brought on this planet, and I've been those too. Like they weren't brought on this planet to make things right for me, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe I need to find somebody else. Maybe they missed the text, right? And how we pause, notice, like maybe a little introspection, like, and then why am I getting, like, what is it about me that they're not responding? And like those patterns that become important. That's why self-regulation is a beautiful teacher.
Yes.
It's an instantaneous teacher.
It is.
So those are the three main triggers in self-regulation, which is good to know, because when we find ourselves triggered, what is one of the three? And the other thing too, when we're with people that are triggered, we know it's one of those three as well, right? So if they're doing something, we can sort of take our ego out of it and get curious, right? We stop like going out and like, all right, there's something else going on. There's a need not being met. It helps us show up better for other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are many ways other than triggers that we can practice self-regulation in our day-to-day life. Ample opportunities to practice self-regulation.
Yes.
What would be some examples of those?
Yeah, how we're protecting our time. I think really, are we mindlessly scrolling and picking up our phone? Like, so what are we doing? How are we regulating ourselves around our time and our space and being intentional, right? So that's a great simple opportunity instead of checking out. Simple things too. If we find ourselves, I'm shopping a lot. Maybe I'm trying to cover something up a little bit. Maybe we look for that instant energy. Wherever we're looking for instant energy is an opportunity for self-regulation. So an instant energy comes in all forms, whether I'm looking for a quick hit because I bought something I really like and I can't wait till it comes. It could be an argument with somebody. It could be honking the horn. Anytime we're looking for instant energy is an opportunity for self-regulation. Pausing when people say things, just listening. Sometimes just listening is an easy way to practice self-regulation. It can be hard to sit in a conversation without thinking about the thing that you're going to say next.
Yeah.
Just listening is a good way to self-regulate, right? I don't have to say anything. I can just sit and be in this space. And there's a multitude of ways. I don't know. Do you practice anything particular for yourself?
As far as self-regulation goes, I tend to practice it more in relation to other people. So this could go back to like your grocery store thing. I think you've also used at one point the example of like Costco on a Saturday. Because that is like the mother of places to practice self-regulation. Definitely putting yourself into those situations where that there's going to be some triggers or some frustrations, because then you can see it. That's, I think, a good way to measure how well you're doing on developing self-regulation. For me, it's at work too, that it's looking at, and it's not just my own self-regulation, it's watching how other people self-regulate or don't self-regulate, and just kind of noticing the dynamic of what happened there. Like this person handled it really well. This person did not handle it very well. And just kind of almost seeing the tactics that people use to regulate themselves that are not beneficial to the people around them. So in my work environment, there's a lot of passive aggressiveness, which makes the person who's being passive aggressive feel okay, like they're safe, right? Because I'm dealing with it.
Yeah.
But it's not the best way to deal with it. And when you deal with it like that, you're making somebody else feel like crap. So looking at the dynamics of that helps me to say, okay, when I get into a space where maybe my inclination is to be passive aggressive, wait, like I know what that looks like and I know what the outcome is and what it makes other people feel like. So it kind of pulls me back to be like, okay, what's the next response or thing that I can try in that situation? So I learn a lot from watching people. I watch people a lot. It's not creepy. I just watch people a lot. I think human dynamics is fascinating.
Human behavior and dynamics is fascinating. If you just want to like watch, it's wild. It's wild out there. And it's very interesting to watch. But the thing is, like, we think we're always being like triggered. Like we trigger other people. Like I know I do, probably drives other people crazy, right? We get back to that self-awareness space, that external self-awareness, like asking the right people, like, what's an opportunity for me? What's something you could like to see changed or I can do differently next time? We haven't talked about it yet, but we talk about negative communication patterns too. If we find, then there's 4 of them. They're John Gottman's, right? There's criticism, right? Criticism, going after someone personally, attacking their being. There's contempt, right? You should be so lucky that I'm even here, right? And then there's defensiveness, like I only did it because you did this, right? Like turning it on the person who's trying to like tell you something. Then there's stonewalling, right? I'm walking away, don't even come after me, like demonstrating separation. Those 4 things, and we all have them when we start to feel like I want to be critical, or I feel like I want to be contempt. I want to show contempt towards this person. If I want to get defensive, or if I want to walk away, those are also spaces to self-regulate and ask ourselves, okay. And defensiveness is my thing. Like you talked about, it all comes like you see it at work, passive aggressiveness. Like we all don't learn how to, like, we just know what we know growing up and what works, what gets our needs met. And we will continue to do that behavior to get our needs. And ironically though, the only reason we continue doing that behavior is because our need is not being met. Like our true need is not being met. And so, all right. How do we start to see those things as well as opportunities to self-regulate and show up better?
And I think that's another great space for like the reflectiveness, right? If you've been at work today and you had maybe a confrontation with a coworker, that night when you get home and you've like done the breath, maybe done your breath work, you've meditated, you're in a good journaled, is like journaling about, like, here's the situation and this was my reaction. It was one of the 4, like, let's hope it doesn't go to contempt, because contempt is like, that's a hard road to come back from. But looking at like, was I stonewalling? Was I defensive? What was the other one besides contempt? Critical, like pointing out somebody else's faults, right? So you look at that and you're like, which one of these did I use? And then over time, you're going to start to see a pattern. What's your go-to? So yours is defensiveness. I use that every now and then. Stonewalling is me because I grew up in a family.
I love a good stonewalling.
Yeah. Grew up in a family when people got pissed off, they just gave you the silent treatment.
Yes.
It was, this is done.
Maybe a little guilt sprinkled on top of the treatment. Yeah. Oh, it's great.
Yes. Looking at like my go-to response in these situations is always this. Boom, there's self-awareness in that right there, where you're like, okay, something I need to look at. Where is that coming from? B, it gives you the opportunity to say, okay, I know when I go into another situation that's like this, I need to try something different.
Yeah.
And maybe not be the silent treatment. Maybe it's taking the pause and opening up the dialogue or figuring out a way to make the situation more safe for both people to have constructive communication.
I think we get so concerned with like winning.
Yeah.
And if we're just acknowledging someone's point, that we feel like that's not good enough. They have to, right? They have to be seen. I don't want them to think I agree with them, but there's so much power. People just want to be seen and heard, right? There's
Yeah.
so much power. And be like, thank you for telling me how you're feeling. Like, I really appreciate it. And thank you for letting me know that my action, like, and it's like, yeah, right. Like in them, and this is why it's a practice, right? Because it doesn't
Yes.
always come easy. It doesn't always come naturally. It's a practice to be like,
Yeah.
or if you're a stonewaller, to be like, listen, what I really want to do is walk away, but I need like 10 minutes by myself to sort of get myself together so I can come back and we can have this conversation.
That's a huge step in the right direction for a stonewaller. It's just to take that beat,
Yeah.
regulate yourself, go
Yeah.
back at it.
Yeah. Be like, and I want to have a productive conversation. And the moment I'm feeling right now, I don't feel like, and people like, no one ever does that. I do it all the time. Like sometimes like things are going on and I'm like, I feel myself getting defensive and I'm like I'm ready to like pounce, right? And I'm like, hold on a second. This is just a test. Like I can acknowledge someone else's feelings and see them without necessarily admitting fault, apologizing for it. Like I can see your point without agreeing with your point. Like, and that's a much more mature way to handle it. But we don't grow up in families that do that very well. But I do. And you know, like, and like you said, contempt is hard. So when we find ourselves like, you should just be lucky that I'm even with you. Like, ooh, okay, right. And that's where this journey is important. Because, like, all right, why am I in situations with people that are acting in contempt for it? And it's also a trigger for us to recognize in a good way. Like, if someone's doing this to us, they're now triggered, right? Like, there's a need that's not being met for them. That's their go-to language, just like I have mine. And if it's space, I can take my ego out of me, like, hey, not like you're being defensive or don't you dare walk away from me, but like, hey, what's going on right now?
Yeah.
Like, right? Like this isn't normally like you. And you know, and just getting more curious instead of
how can I better support you in having this conversation?
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, like, how can we like dial it? And people are like that, no one ever does that. Yeah, people do, right?
Yeah.
We know how to have conflict and regulate. That's all part of self-regulation.
Yes. Yes. And to a point, like with the contempt thing, like how serious it is if that's the communication that's going on. When John and Julie Gottman did their research around the conflict languages, the couples that had contempt never made it.
Never.
That's just
Yeah.
that's how it's going to end. So you can think of this as you and your coworker. If contempt is always the go-to form, that relationship is going to fall apart, period.
It will be irretrievably broken.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And there's been a lot that's happened. You know, that picture of the iceberg where like the majority of it's like there's a lot happening underneath that got someone to a point of contempt that not necessarily is about you, but like there's a lot of belief systems and other stuff happening there that is just, and it's unfortunate.
I mean, I use two kind of mantras whenever I go into communication with other people, especially if I know that it's heated or there's disagreement going on. The first one is always assume positive intention.
Yeah.
And just start with that. They're a good person. They're coming at this with the positive intention.
Yeah.
The second one is to keep in mind, Aristotle said this, it's the mark of an intelligent man to be able to hold two ideas at the same time and not feel like you have to believe in both of them. So you may believe one thing and this person believes something totally different. That's fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to adopt their belief. You just have to listen to it and hold it. And you don't have to make a scene about it. Like, I don't believe in that belief. It just hold it. I don't have to take it on myself. That's all good for you.
Two things can be simultaneously true at the exact same time, right? But we have our brain likes us to think that everyone thinks just like us, right? Like it does. But two things can be held true at the exact same time without the need to get defensive or upset or to prove a point. Like if we find ourselves in a space where we're trying to like justify, improve, like we've lost. No one in the history of time is like, oh, thank you so much for yelling your whatever at me. I totally see where you're coming from now. And I believe the exact same thing you do. No one's done that.
Yeah, no.
That's not the way you're going to ever get your your point or whatever crosses in that space
Yes.
ever.
Yes. And if you want proof of this, look at social media, look at the political environment that we're living in.
But even then, it's quick energy. We love quick energy. We want to feel like, yes, I got them, right? Like win. And in the moment it spikes and we feel good and there's nothing afterward. Versus always living in a space, like in the majority of time, like in a good energy space, right? Not needing to go after people, not needing to be right, not needing to like be part of a conversation or have a point or need to insert ourselves, like all that stuff.
Yep. You have to choose the energy that you want to be a part of, because it is true that they taught us this in IPEC, right? Entrainment is that you get around people who are at one energy and either they elevate to yours or you get sucked down to theirs. So be very aware of the energetic spaces that you're putting yourself into. And if you don't have to be in those situations, don't go someplace where it's in higher energy.
And we talk a lot about like triggers and like the big stuff, but like little things like gossiping, right? Talking about somebody else.
Why are we still gossiping in our 40s?
30s, like got, like having to, tell a story to feel, I mean, all the things that we do and we think it's subtle. We're like, oh, I'm just Kristen and I talking. We're just gonna, it's no one's heard. No, they didn't hear. They have no idea. But that's about self-regulation too. And it's about putting yourself in a good energetic space. Like, I'm not going to put myself in a space where I'm talking about other people, talking down about other people, listening to people talk down about other people. I can excuse myself out of that. Like, that's all self-regulation too. Like, I don't want to contribute to it. And I also don't want to make, and this, it gets into the broader picture of what are we allowing coming into our lives? If I'm going to sit and watch news all day long, that energetically, depending on what side, I mean, you could get fired up all day long about all the different things that are going on.
Depressed.
Totally depressed, angry. And then when you're with your friends that night, you're like, did you read that? Like, what are we watching? What are we listening to? What are we allowing into our space? And that's also part of self-regulation, like being very mindful. What is the space that I'm creating and I'm putting myself into? Because like you said, they'll come to you or you'll just go down to it. It's very easy to fall down a rabbit hole of some of those things that aren't like, for what? And people are like, well, you can't be naive. You can't not watch the news. Like, well, I mean, nothing's changed since I've stopped watching the news. Like nothing, like the world has,
I'll eventually hear about it. My brother jokes with me all the time about this. He's like, how do you get the news? And I'm like, podcasts. Like I listen to podcasts, and granted, I may be way behind when something actually happened by the time it gets to me, but I know that it happened. Like the whole Alex Jones thing.
I don't even know.
Oh yeah. Okay, perfect. I love you. I love that you don't know. Because it's stupid. But it was on some podcasts. And then I brought it up to my brother and he was like, oh yeah, like tell me this whole story. And I'm like, yeah, I had no idea that was even a thing. But what I love too, like you brought this up so many times in our coaching sessions. I think it came up in your first episode, is that when we surround ourselves with people, what's the context of what we're talking about? We should be talking about our hopes, our dreams, our ideas, how we want to change the world. What's our next great project that we want to take on? That's energy. That's like level 6 synergistic energy. You can't go wrong with that.
Yeah. And it's so inspiring and motivating, and they push you and it makes you think differently. And yes, I think at the end of it, we are all these most incredibly powerful human beings with so much talent and capability. And we have gone so far from who we are. Society and people want to put us in a space, and we do what everyone does, and it doesn't lead to the right place. And how beautiful it is to be in a space with people who are like, let's learn, let's grow. What are we creating, inventing, doing, going? Like, let's do that big stuff. That's what the world needs, right? It's what the world
100%. 100%. Like this is the problem that we see in society, is that everybody's so focused on the negative and being right and the black white of the situation, instead of looking at it like, how can we elevate each other? How can we elevate situations? What are the areas that we need to be paying the most attention to that are going to make the biggest impact on society healing itself and becoming cohesive again.
Yes.
100%. Like,
And we're the start of it. We have to be the example that shows up and does that. And listen, like I was at dinner with the girls on Friday night, and we're all moms, all our kids are in the same grade together, and we're having a great time. But of course, we're talking about like jobs and kids. And granted, there needs to be a space to have a space, right? Like, so we all, sometimes that, all right, we're all in the same thing, and what's happening to you is happening to me. So, all right, we're all normal. But even like halfway through dinner, I was like, you know what? Like, can we talk about, like, I have a fun question to ask, right? Like, how can we get to know people? And that self-regulation space to like, all right, let's get really present in the moment. Let's not try to interrupt and be like, oh, let's play my game now. But like, hey, listen, I want to learn about you. Like, that's not mom, it's not job, it's not the things that we always talk about, but it's like who you are as a person. I have some great questions for that. And I love that. And it was fun and funny and interesting, because I think I learned so much more about the four women than I have over the past 2 years our kids have been in school together. So just little things like that in that self-regulation space, just like how I'm showing up first, like you said, and inspiring conversation that's leading to something bigger.
Yes. And I also feel like too, when you put yourself in more of those situations, those high vibe situations, that's the vibration you start to carry on a regular basis. And I'm a big believer in your vibe attracts your tribe. So if you want badass people in your life, you've got to be vibing on that high vibe space.
And your limiting beliefs will find their soulmate in other people. So if you're going to vibe on like, it'll find their friend somewhere else, right? Like, we can put ourselves into an echo chamber of our own making, where we're always just talking about the same thing and the same stuff, and people and the same this. And that's not to say, like I said, it's not good or bad. It's just where they are. Or we can be like, you know what? I want something bigger. I want something different. I want to think about it. And you're absolutely right. Your vibe gets your
100%. 100%. So your key takeaways that you bring in around self-regulation are reframe, recognize, reflect. There's our reflection again. And relinquish. So let's touch on each one of these. I love reframing. I think it's the most powerful coaching tool that we learned. Hands down.
It's fabulous. I reframe all the time.
Absolutely.
And then it gets to a point where like, I'm just reframing situations without like having to think about, oh, I need to reframe this situation. This person just cut me off. Right? Like, you're like, whatever. Reframe is, so people who don't know about reframing, it's how can we look at this from a different angle? And simple things like someone speeding past you on the highway, right? Instead of your honk your horn and flip your finger at them or whatever, it's like, maybe they're going to the hospital. Maybe someone's really sick in the car with them right now. Like, whatever it takes. Or someone's writing a check in line in front of the grocery store. Like, maybe they like their checkbook. Maybe they like the checks that they ordered. I don't know, like anything. And like bigger situations that are happening, if we're in bigger situations, how do we shift to think about it differently that allows us to change that belief around what's happening to move us forward? So reframing is very powerful.
Yes. And it helps you to regulate, because it might take that anger and all of a sudden it's down to like compassion for the guy hauling ass down the highway.
And I found over time, I don't even notice those things anymore. Like, as we do it, like little things, like I'm like, oh, I didn't even notice that was going on. Not from like, and I'm oblivious or I'm so above it, but I've reframed it so many times that like, it doesn't hit me the same way it used to, like it would hit me initially, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yes. So recognize.
That's like get present. That's like, like let's recognize what we're doing. What are our triggers? What are maybe some of our defensive languages? Like, just get really, those are, I think, some of the biggest, my growth in self-awareness was so much more exponential when I focused on self-regulation, how I'm showing up in situations, what I'm saying, how I'm acting, how I'm reacting to situations. So recognizing that is going to only build your self-awareness.
Yeah. So a question just popped into my head around this. And it's not like I want to jump back to when you were talking about, the conflict languages. Is there a way? I know you can't make somebody become more self-aware. Like, that has to be a choice for them. Is there a way that you can help somebody self-regulate better?
Oh yeah. Like, I mean, when we want to, like, if people are starting to get that way, like, hey, I see you. Tell me what's going on. Like, hey, like, how can we talk through this? Like, not pointing out the fact that they're being defensive or they're
Mhm.
doing, but getting very curious and not elevating the situation by any sort. Like, let's not
Yeah.
bigger situation. Let's get curious. What can I do? Do we need to take a moment and just removing yourself, people from situation, whatever
Yeah.
it is? Yes, there's plenty of opportunities to take it down a notch.
Yeah.
It can feel so hard to be the bigger person though.
Yeah. Yep.
It can feel,
And sometimes you don't want to do this while it's happening because like the emotions are so big. It's like
yes,
after the effect, like maybe the next day you see that coworker at work. So everybody's had time to diffuse, sleep, etc. And you're like, hey, yesterday we had this conversation and I just want to check in. Are you okay? And is there something I can do to support you or help you? Because it seemed like you were very upset or hurt or whatever. Correct me if I'm wrong. Always offer them the you're not reading me right. Just tell
yes.
you what's really going on with them, and then dive into that conversation.
Yeah. And to step away from a conversation, and not engaging into some sort of space and not necessarily stonewalling, right? Like you could hear and then just not reacting, right? Giving it a day, giving it a beat,
Yeah.
just to rethink and come back to it is very important.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely help people recognize
Yeah.
and I think too, showing up by example. So they'll know eventually when they get into conversations with you, this is how you're going to react. So if you are always seeing someone and like, oh yeah, and can let me know or whatever, then that changes the dynamic entirely.
Yes. In fact, Cheryl and I talked about this in her podcast, and like role modeling is one of the most powerful ways to get other people on board with. So her topic is boundaries.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about self-regulation. It could also be about self-awareness. Role modeling these things shows people what it looks like, and it also gives them permission to do it,
Yes.
which is super powerful.
It's powerful. And I even talk about this in webinars or keynotes. Like when you ask a question, you give other people permission to ask questions. And it's not that everyone didn't have permission, but sometimes we just need somebody else just to kick it
Mhm.
off a little bit, just to be the starting point so that I now feel comfortable
Yeah.
attempting it and seeing that it works. And
Yes.
then like they're happy and things are good. And role modeling is powerful.
Yes, it is. Okay, reflection. So questioning what you do, why you do it to help
Yeah.
you develop the skills to increase your effectiveness. So this
Yeah.
is again those reflective practices of journaling, of even just sitting with it after it happened.
Yeah, recognizing what's going on so we can reflect on it. Were there certain people? Was it a time of day? Is there, did I not, was it just because I didn't have breakfast or lunch and now
Mhm.
my blood sugar's all, whatever
Yeah.
it is, those little things over time, 1% to make a big difference and help us
Mhm.
to create self-awareness. So like, so why am I doing that? What's that behavior so that I can go back and like, all right, I need to do something differently next time. I'm going to try this. What's a new opportunity for me? Next time this
Mhm.
comes up, I'm going to do this differently. So it all
Yeah.
circles.
Yes, absolutely. And then the last one is relinquish. And I told you before, I'm like, I love that word.
Relinquish.
Oh,
I had a
yeah.
big conversation with someone about, I was coaching with somebody, one of my executive coaches, and it was just that letting go, like relinquishing, and their struggle with like letting it go.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of reasons we want to feel right. We want to feel vindicated. We want to like, there's a lot of reasons why we don't want to let go. And there's so much power in just relinquishing it.
Yes. Yes. And letting it go doesn't, I think a lot of people think that if I let it go, that I'm condoning the behavior of that person. And it's like, no,
You're
this
giving
is
yourself
like,
permission. Letting go, just like forgiveness. It's not that their behavior is being all of a sudden like it's fine. It's giving yourself permission to move forward.
yes.
Just to move forward, right? Like, all right, I'm not going to
Yeah.
let this thing fester for me. I'm not going to spend so much time in my brain thinking about this thing anymore. Like, it's not that they were forgiven or need forgiveness. It's not that they're now right and you're wrong or anything like that.
Yeah.
So much power in just relinquishing.
Yep. Because as soon as you let go of that thing, it opens up all this energetic space for something new to come into,
Yeah,
you know?
it does. It really does. And what we don't want is because over time, if we don't let go, we just hold on to it and harbor, it just festers. And like, that's not hurting them.
Yeah.
Like, like they're not the ones that are losing sleep and brain space and like
Yeah.
that's only affecting you. Like they're not suffering equally and simultaneously like you are. You're
Yeah.
just doing it to like you're really just doing it to yourself.
Yep.
It's only
Yep.
affecting you. It doesn't affect the other person how much you're holding on to it and talk. I mean, but
Yeah. It's a process, I think,
yeah,
sometimes, but at the end of the day, like, let that shit go. Just let it go.
I know. And listen, there are things in my journey that I'm still working on
Mhm.
years later to like let go of.
Yeah.
And I'm just not there yet. Is it
Yes.
taking up a lot of my thought and time and whatever? No. But when I do think about the situation, I still feel something about it. Like there's still
Yeah.
feelings there.
Yeah.
And I'm just not quite there. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep chipping away at it, like keep on the work that I'm going to do into myself, navigating through, navigating forward so that I will eventually get to a day where I feel at peace with it. I'm
Yep.
not there.
Yep.
I don't know if you have those things
Absolutely.
too, but yeah, like it's
Oh
not
yeah.
like,
I mean, I
oh,
feel like the deeper the wound maybe, or the deeper the situation, that those are the ones that tend to take me more time to let go. I'm letting go like incrementally, it's
yeah,
not just like letting go all in one
yeah.
piece
I
to the
think
wind.
I think too a lot of what we don't do is we can create identities around these things about
Yes.
the being wronged, the hurt, the argument, like,
Yeah.
and you can find a lot of momentum. People who be like, I can't believe it, and they'll get on your boat with you, and like whole identities can be created around these things, and that's what we
Yeah.
don't want to do. We just
Yes.
want to like work on what we need to work on to get ourselves to a place of peace.
Yes. And have patience, especially with the big things that you're working on letting go. Have patience with yourself. It's okay to take as much time as you need to take. You're going to know when it's right to like fully let go. And until that moment, you're in your process, you're in progress.
Progress. And I
Yep.
think it's like, and the learning opportunity, what I'm still learning about myself because I'm still navigating through this.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, self-awareness, self-regulation, really just being human is an ongoing process. You never get to this like happy destination where it's like, okay, I'm here and it's nothing but rainbows and butterflies and unicorns with cotton candy hair. And no, I'm just going to be the realistic person who says, don't wait for that to happen. Enjoy the process of getting to whatever it is on the other end.
Yeah, I think now
Enjoy
I
that.
enjoy, yeah, and I think I enjoy the unfolding. Like I
Yeah.
actually enjoy the unfolding. I actually, I like the unknown. Like,
Yeah.
right. I'm like, I get curious. I'm like, all right, we'll just see how this goes. Like it's very interesting now instead of being worried about it, just enjoy the unfolding.
Yeah. I like the discomfort now too, because I'm like, oh, I'm just in like the discomfort zone. Something's growing, something's changing,
Yeah.
and who knows
Yeah.
what's going to come out on the other side of this.
Yeah, it's like you and there's typically right like when we're in it like we know something good's gonna come out the other end like
Yeah.
it always does but yeah and then you're like oh, it didn't quite go
Yep.
the way I wanted or it's not going but oh, I'm gonna get it's something good's
Yeah.
coming. Love
It's
your
going to happen.
love your song and dance.
So, what resources do we have around self-regulation for people to dive into?
Yeah, so I have an emotional intelligence workbook I've put together for corporate clients talking about self-regulation spaces. We talk about triggers in there, questions that I could be thinking about for myself. So I have a resource that we can absolutely put up and they can download this for free and just start to think about these things just to give some thought to it. There are incredible authors out there in all different spaces. I know you talked about Martha Beck. We've talked
Yes.
about Brene Brown. Glennon Doyle reaches certain
Yes.
people. Like who else? I mean, I could probably go on and on with.
I mean,
Tremendous.
it's like if you're thinking in the trauma portion of it, of like digging back to find out where these patterns, behaviors came from, Paul Conti's book, Trauma. Fantastic. I think he's probably one of the most intelligent humans on this planet. There's so many personal development growth books. I will go through my large collection and I will put some of the books that have helped me into the show notes for you to look at, because I do think they are all very helpful. Nicole LePera is another one, How to Do the Work. Is a walk,
she's a
like
good one.
walks you through the process.
Yeah. And I think Brene Brown's Atlas at the Heart gives a lot of good words. Like a lot of times our language hasn't caught up to the actual thing that we're feeling. So our language can be very limiting. So how we put the right word to the right feeling, the right emotion, so that we're using the language. Yes. And then we can shift the language as well, as a great one. So we'll put a list together.
Yes. Perfect. And so our next episode 3 of the series, we're going to be jumping into motivation. So stay tuned. We have a lot more to talk about. I'm super excited to talk about the motivation piece, because I think this is something that a lot of people are dealing with right now. So
yes. And I love, we're going to talk about conscious, subconscious, who's running the show.
One of my favorite topics.
It's going to be good. It'll be a great conversation.
All right, Rachel, thank you so much for coming and being a part of this today. And we will look forward to touching base with you on episode 3 of the series.
Thanks, Kristen. I appreciate it. And we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good.